Good morning. I'm Jenny Ray LaRue. I'm here this morning with my colleague Namaan Mian. Good morning, Namaan. Welcome to Market Outsiders today.
Morning. I'm excited to dive into what's happening in business and the markets today.
So, Namaan and I have natural differences in what we see in the business news based on where we are on any given day. So, today I'm on the West Coast, Namaan is in the Midwest. Are you in the Midwest? Is Texas the Midwest?
Nah, Texas is its own thing.
Okay, you're in Texas. Sorry about that. Um, you know what? I'm really glad you cleared that up for us because I think my husband, who's a immigrant to the U.S., calls all of the states that don't touch an ocean the ones in the middle. So since you guys are just on the Gulf of Mexico, you're included in that, the ones in the middle.
Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to let Paul know I'm so grateful.
So yeah, it's easy in my household to conflate Midwest and Texas because you happen to be in the middle of the country. But yeah, there's a lot that's happening in geopolitical news. There's a lot that's happening in economic news. There's a lot that's happening in markets news. We're going to go niche today, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into something that we have only touched on really briefly, but I think is going to be a super interesting part of our conversation today. So. I'm going to pull up well, I saw the news and then what I did was I pulled up a search on this because I thought it would be kind of interesting. One of the things that we tease out is how you interpret the headlines and what you see inside there. And then I'm going to dive into one of the articles. So I'm just going to share my Google Chrome search. I just searched for JPMorgan Chase Sapphire because the news broke this morning that the Chase Sapphire Reserve card is changing both its fee and its perks. And so I just wanted to read a few of these article heads, and then I'm going to click into the CNBC one just because they have a lot of the information kind of as an aggregator. So first one was JP Morgan Chase unveils new Sapphire Reserve card perks and a $795 annual fee. JP Morgan hikes Sapphire Reserve fee to $795 in-card overhaul. JP Morgan Chase is hiking the annual fee of its popular Sapphire card by 45%, and Chase Sapphire Reserve is the best travel card once more. So, Naman, first question for you. Do you have a Chase Sapphire Reserve card? Why did you get it? And what would make you think differently about the card? Just curious as we kind of kick off on talking about some of the specifics here.
Yes, I have been a loyal Chase Sapphire Reserve card holder for many years. I had not seen this news this morning. I've been heads down in other work, so I'm glad I showed up today because this is a conversation I'd want to have whether we were on the podcast or not. And so I'm excited to dive into what they've changed. And honestly, this is a pretty staggering increase in the annual fee. I know you're going to dive into the article in just a minute, but right now it's $550 a year. So to go from 550 to 795, like I'm hoping there's like a dramatic increase in either the quality of the perks or the usability of the perks or something along those lines. We'll see. But the reason that I got the Sapphire Reserve initially was because of two reasons. Number one, the point earning on the reserve was attractive for where I spend money. It was three points per dollar spent on travel and 3 points per dollar spent on dining. And just with our professional lifestyle, we're on the road quite a bit, and so it was attractive to me, just based on where you got the bonus points in terms of your spend categories. And then I also love having Chase Ultimate Rewards points because they transfer to like 20 or 30 different airline and hotel partners. They hold their value really well on a transfer basis. So I just find that it gives me max flexibility when I want to book points with travel. And so those were the two main reasons. There are other reasons. I won't get into those, but big picture, I've been really happy with being a Sapphire cardholder. How about you?
So, Naman, I have an interesting backstory before we dive into the numbers. I was persuaded, not even by you, but actually before, while I was a corporate traveler, that the Chase Sapphire Reserve was the card to have in your wallet. So I kind of started out on the traditional trajectory, and I started out with a Delta Amex card. That was kind of my first corporate card. And then I had a personal Capital One card. Those were kind of the ways that I thought about my spend. And I was always able to use either one of those when I traveled with Amex not being accepted as much internationally. I thought, okay, this will kind of make a lot of sense. Well, fast forward, I mean, I have a lot more cards in my wallet. I have a lot more businesses under my belt now. I travel. I also segment out my spend for different reasons. And the only card that I have downgraded actually in my entire life was from the Chase Sapphire Reserve last year. So, one of the reasons that I joined the Chase Sapphire Reserve program is that I was not at the time a United Club member. I didn't have the United Club card. I didn't use the United Club, even though United is the only major to fly out of my home city. I used instead the JPMorgan Chase card everywhere that I flew. They had the dining benefits, and so I had for me and for my travel, I utilized that for myself and for other folks that were traveling with me. I used it often not just as a like dine in option, but actually more often as a to go option. So it was kind of like a meal plan on the road for me. And when they removed it, I could not see enough reason to keep. I actually didn't spend. I was kind of one of those rare people who, did the $550 on the card and then didn't spend the amount that you kind of would expect on the points and the other reasons that you talked about having the card. So I was kind of in that classic place of wanting to downgrade from the card. And on forums, I saw a lot of other people in that same piece saying, hey, like the perks just aren't worth the $550 fee anymore. I'm out. So I downgraded. I still have a Chase card, but it's like whatever the lowest level one is now. I use it for one of my businesses. I don't ever use it for travel anymore. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to dive into some of the numbers today because you and I are two of the target customers that they're looking. They're looking to win me back. They're looking not to lose you in the process. Let's see what they've done here. So JP Morgan Chase unveils new Sapphire Reserve card perks and a $795 annual fee. Um, right, they just today introduced this. So if you're kind of getting this news as breaking news, welcome to the pod. The bank is touting a new redemption program that doubles the value of points used for select travel offers. So this is what I want to know from you is, Namaan, does this make a difference for you? And a $500 annual credit at its collection of hotels and resorts. I'm curious if they're the ones that you use alongside other benefits, right? Or would it be enough for you to book something at one of these in order to kind of utilize this? So first of all, important to note, and this is kind of the headline across the headlines as you saw from everybody, right? 45% jump on the annual fee. So now it's at $795. My best guess is that they're expecting that the difference between 550 and 795 is not very significant for their consumers. The difference between a 95 and a 295 credit card fee for a lower end consumer is different than the perception of a 45% increase at that level. The largest price increase ever since their 2016 launch. So I think that's pretty significant. JP Morgan says users will now get this $2,700 in annual benefits. And for me, what my calculus was before was like, I don't care how many benefits you load onto the card, I'm not using them anymore. Right. And so like this is only worth it if enough of their customers think like this is what I'm going to do. I have a lot more faith, though, in the $795 annual fee increase than I did in the clawback of the benefits from before, because I would see fewer people being price sensitive than benefit sensitive. And I think that's a very interesting piece of this. So this $500 annual credit, it's collection of hotels and resorts. They may have had one before because I rarely ever used my card for travel expenses. I don't know if I was using it. A $300 dining credit that are a part of the Sapphire Reserve exclusive tables network. I think this is very interesting because I was just reading yesterday that Amex, which I think has purchased both Resi and Talk, which is something that I've come into contact with now as a winery. Talk is used at a lot of wineries for bookings and for reservations. I would never thought of the alignment between those businesses. But I just was reading about that yesterday. So I don't know if you use the Tables Network or if you know about it. These are things that I would want to dive into. The $300 credit for purchases at StubHub or via GoGo. I don't see enough things live that I would probably use that in a year. or even remember, honestly, to use this card when I was thinking about throwing it down for that specific purchase. And then free subscriptions to Apple Plus TV. Apple Plus TV is the only streaming service I've ever cut the cord from too. And so I used to have it. I watched Ted Lasso, and when I was done, I didn't actually go find other things on Apple Plus TV. Anyhow, this one I think is potentially the most interesting, and then I'll turn it over to you for some commentary. Right, customers who spend $75,000 annually on their cards unlock other perks such as top tier status at Southwest. I know Southwest flies out of the Austin airport a lot, and also IHG hotels and resorts, which I rarely stay at, but maybe you stay at more. So what do you think?
I'm underwhelmed, to be honest with you. So let me talk first about it from like a business perspective. Like, why do I think
Sure.
JPMorgan Chase is doing this right now? When this news first broke a few days ago that they were going to refresh the card and they had kind of already soft launched the annual fee was going to increase, my first thought was, oh, this is capital for the lounge build out. So one of the things that JP Morgan Chase is late to the game on is having its own network of lounges. So they have like four or five, I believe, right now across the US. And you compare that to American Express that has like at least one in every major airport in the country. And
Except I just found out Salt Lake City, they're opening one this year. And that was in my article yesterday that I was reading about was the
interesting.
lounge build
And
out.
I think
So there were a few majors, but yeah, it was like 75 airports or
And I
something.
would think that one of the reasons that maybe Salt Lake City was last on the list for Amex is because they have such a tie-up with Delta, and that's a Delta hub. So your
Yeah,
same customers probably have Sky Club access if they're flying through Salt Lake City. There you go.
that's me.
Right.
Yep.
And so, and I would say if you're a Delta elite, it probably makes the least amount of sense for you to have a Sapphire Reserve because you have to go through this convoluted process to use your points on Delta, right? There's such a
Mhm.
tie-up between Amex and Delta that, anyways, like you probably shouldn't have a Sapphire Reserve if you're a Delta Elite. To me, I was like, oh, they're looking to raise capital to fund like a bigger and faster lounge build out. And I've been to some of the Chase Sapphire Reserve lounges that they have. I've been to the one in San Diego. Like they're fantastic. Like I think they really do go toe to toe against the Centurion lounges. And I think number one, they're hoping that this is increased cash flow to fund that build out. Number two, I think they're looking to cull the herd a little bit before the lounges reach critical mass because one of the issues that American Express has had is overcrowding of lounges, and the airlines are having the same issue. And when you have an overcrowding of lounges, you have like this perception that now the product isn't as premium. And so I think what they're actually hoping is that they cut the customer base a little bit. They've done the math, they've built the models. They have a little bit of a smaller customer base, but they're incrementally making more revenue because they're not going to lose 45% of their customer base based on this, right? So they're going to make more money. And now all of a sudden, like not only are you generating more revenue, you're probably having to pay out less in benefits because my guess is like the benefit use is like more evenly distributed. So if you have a smaller customer base, you might be actually like spending less on benefits, you're generating more in revenue, and you're enhancing again the brand prestige of the card because it's seen now as a ultra premium offering. So I think that's why they're doing it from a business perspective. For me as a consumer, I'd want to know how that redemption program works. Like I know they just launched it today. CNBC probably didn't get a chance to kind of dive into the mechanics. That's what I'd want to know. Because if I feel like I can use that, okay, then the annual credit almost pays for the annual fee. And the other thing that the Sapphire Reserve offers is a $300 annual credit on travel. And they categorize travel very broadly. Like if you take an Uber, that counts as travel. And so, I use that $300 annual credit every year, and that effectively brings my annual fee down to $250 a year. So if I could use this new $500 annual credit, stack that with the $300 travel credit, well, my annual fee is already paid for, and then everything else is gravy. So to me, like my downgrade decision really hinges on what this redemption program looks like.
So I think that there are two super interesting things about this from a business perspective as well, Naman, and then I want to dive even deeper into the article real quick. So the first is that I've done these kinds of pricing increase analyses for some major organizations. In fact, I was kind of astonished at how a lot of the work that I did in consulting was on you should increase your prices. and how much pushback we would naturally get from leaders who were great leaders, but who had often taken an Econ 101 class that said, like, when you raise prices, you lose customers, right? And that is in general true. Like you mentioned, you expect that a 45% jump is going to result in the loss of customers. And what they didn't understand was the
Plus
magnitude
elasticity.
difference. They didn't understand that in an inelastic market, which most markets are much more inelastic than they predicted, they would fall anywhere from this 45% jump entirely to the bottom line, right, which is a purely inelastic market. You just charge more and everybody stays, or some small customer loss, but then every single customer that you have is incrementally more profitable. You have increased capacity to serve those customers. And that's not just in the Chase Sapphire Reserve lounges, that's on the phone when you're talking to somebody. That's every piece of your network. And so, what I don't know about Chase and about this card profile specifically, and there's probably very little public data on this, is what percentage of card earnings are from this annual fee versus from the interchange, right, from the actual card swipes, and probably more importantly, from the interest fees. And so, I don't know on a per customer basis what the total package looks like. But for Chase, like this is pretty significant from the customer perspective. But if they don't lose all of those other pieces, then they're literally just dropping a bunch of money to the bottom line. So we did that calculus. I think you're right. I think they're going to lose way fewer than 45% of their customers. And there's going to be additional benefits. So in general, when I was advising businesses, for Bain and since we've been advising businesses, I mean, I was on a panel a month ago and literally into the microphone, somebody was like, I want to keep my prices low. And I said, why? I shouted it out and the whole room laughed because I'm known as like the price taking advisor. I think it's really important that a lot of people understand, like you have customers that are more loyal to you than you think you are. And I think Chase gets that. Um, I also think that the other piece that I just wanted to asterisk is the Southwest Airlines top tier status, because we talked a little bit about the overhaul of Southwest Airlines just a few weeks ago on the pod. We talked about their kind of changeover from the two bags free. I flew Southwest twice since then. We talked a little bit about the change. Like you're in a Southwest hub. There's no lounges for Southwest. In fact, my kids know they're frequent travelers just like we are. They know that if we fly on Delta, we go to the Delta Lounge. If we fly on United, we go to the United Lounge. If we fly on Southwest, we eat Annie Ann's pretzels. And so like this idea of kind of tagging up with another airline that is both trying to boost its rewards itself. So Southwest is like Southwest is in the Chase family already, but they're also specifically like almost every change across the board at Southwest is to drive up credit card usage and to drive up credit card subscriptions, right? Adoption. So Southwest Airlines, I think, is a really interesting asterisk in this story.
And I think this is Southwest making a play for that premium customer because they're rolling out extra legroom seating, right? So all of a sudden, top tier status is going to mean something at Southwest in a way it hasn't meant something before. One other thing I'll just very quickly mention, Jenny Rae. My guess is that Chase looked at the numbers and saw that like more of their profit from this card than they were comfortable with was coming from the annual fee. And I think that $75,000 threshold is their way to incentivize more spend so that they can kind of even out that revenue mix a little bit. That's like when I read between the lines, I'm like, oh, why do you set a $75,000 spending threshold? That must be ambitious enough for your cardholder, but attainable. And so like the average spend on the Chase Sapphire card per customer might be something like $50,000 to $60,000 a year. And they've done the math and they're like, okay, if we're going to lose some customers, we're going to generate incremental revenue because of the increase in the annual fee. But how else do we generate incremental revenue? If we can convert X% of those customers to spending 10 or 15 or $20,000 more per year with us. And so that's like another lever that they're pulling. And again, it evens out the revenue mix a little bit. So I'm sure that that's an analysis that was done.
Agreed. Probably customer tested with some specific adoption numbers. Usually you don't raise the annual fee on something like this without actually testing that in market. So this, I think, is you highlighted this before, right? Amex and Capital One, so well done. You didn't even read this article. Have had to rein in airport lodges because of overcrowding. That could be done by design. Is like culling the herd a little bit, is what you mentioned, right? Later this year, Amex will introduce update to its platinum cards. I know you mentioned this on our pre-call today, but right. So Amex is, I'm guessing the 695 annual fee is going to get bumped. Dang, right? So I'm when Amex sees this for Chase, Chase was often a price follower when it came to this until the Chase Sapphire Reserve was launched. And then that was really the price leader. It was always like, well, and one of the ways that it kind of distinguished itself was that it was the most expensive card and it got business travelers talking about the benefits. What do you think is worth the $550 spend? Or I think it was maybe 450 when it launched, but it was really, really big number. So I'm guessing that this Amex goes to 695, from 695 to 795 or another fee as well. So I'm guessing we're going to see this top tier of the market really kind of work to keep up.
My prediction, January, is that Amex bests Chase on the annual fee. I think Amex cares a lot about being seen as the most premium provider in the market and the most premium offering. So if Chase is at 795, I think Amex is going to go to something like 850 or 895.
You want to place a $1 bet on it,
Let's do
Namaan?
it. Let's do it.
I was going to say that as a consumer and a current subscriber of those cards at Amex, I'd love to see 750. So I feel like I'm betting against myself if I bet for a higher fee. The last thing I just want to mention, and I actually saw it over here. This was a different piece of business news. This JetBlue news today. I think this is kind of important to tag in. We think a lot about travel at Management Consulted. We, think about cards. We think about airlines. We did a Market Outsiders on the JetBlue and United, kind of cooperation out of New York earlier this year, and this news broke this morning. We both said, "Wow, JetBlue must really be in trouble," but also, why did United do this? And JetBlue cutting more flights, other costs with break even 2025 unlikely due to weaker travel demand. I don't think that this is sector wide. I would need to dive into it to understand it. But I think that this is like really important as a tag on to what we talked about before. We're hopeful demand and bookings will rebound, but even a recovery won't fully offset the ground that we've lost this year. To me, this is United just putting itself in first position to acquire JetBlue. I think it's a potential future acquisition on the books for United to claw back their broader New York market. So my expectation is, as we kind of talked about last month, there's more than meets the eye here because otherwise that kind of partnership doesn't make sense. If there is not already an activist investor on the board of JetBlue, I would imagine that we're going to see one pretty soon. But I doubt that this is extending to all of the other airlines, although I did just get a $250 ticket yesterday from New York to my home city in California in under 2 weeks, which I haven't seen in a long time. So there is potential that there's something going on for sure in the market when you see those kind of price changes in the summer. But I haven't seen anything sector wide. I'd love to dive into it on a future pod though.
Yeah, I'll just say
Thoughts on
quick.
this?
Yeah, so we talked about this when we talked about JetBlue, right? That the reason United does this is number one for gate slots at JFK, which they had lost 10 years ago, and number two because, like you said, right, they want to be first in line for potential acquisition. I think that we've covered that ad nauseum. The thing I'll say here is I do think you're seeing some sector-wide weakness, but not to this level. So when you listen to the earnings calls of Delta and United, they talk about right a little bit of the weakening of the consumer. They talk about some softening demand, and I think that hits JetBlue harder because they cater to the what I'll call the leisure traveler, right? They're concentrated in the Northeast. And what they really focus on is leisure travelers coming out of the Northeast, going to places like Florida or going to places like the Bahamas. And so their customer base isn't as diversified as a United or a Delta. And so you're going to see like greater effects of softening demand at JetBlue than you are at places like United and Delta because that business traveler spend is a little bit more hardened, right? Like you and I, like I'm leaving for a work trip this afternoon, and like it would take a lot for me to cancel that. It would take a lot less for me to cancel like summer vacation plans, if I felt like I had to pinch pennies. And so I think when you are operating in an environment where consumer sentiment is weakening, then airlines that cater to leisure travelers are going to be hit first and they're going to be hit harder. So to me, like the proxy for JetBlue in terms of like the customer base that they cater to is more like Allegiant and Frontier and Spirit. And so I'd go look at that segment of the market and see what's happening with those airlines. I think there's less apples to apples comparison when you compare them to a United or a Delta.
Well, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on, Naman. Thanks again for the great conversation today. I'm excited for you to dive into the Sapphire Reserve changes. You got to let us know on a future episode whether you're going to keep it or whether you're going to be part of the herd that gets culled. And so, hot take at the end of the day, what do you think? Where do you think you're going to land on that?
Oh, I'll tell you what, I hope that I see enough value in it to keep it. So I do some personal finance coaching on the side, and like a lot of people like to keep credit cards because they like the status. And for me, it's just a math equation. If I feel like I can make the money back, I'll keep it. And if I don't feel like I can make the money back, I won't. But I wish they would have announced this 2 months later because I feel like my renewal happens on August 1st. And I would have loved to have been grandfathered in at the old fee for one more year so I could figure it out. But I'm gonna have to make this decision quickly. So I'll report back here in the next 6-ish weeks.
Okay. Well, you're traveling today. There's going to be napkins on the plane. Just grab one, back of the napkin. You'll get this going. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're excited to have you here, and we look forward to having you on a future episode.